Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
Late one autumn, a student named Emily moved into an old dormitory on the edge of campus. The building had a reputation, whispered warnings about strange noises, unexplained cold spots, and students who had moved out abruptly, unable to explain why. Emily dismissed it as typical campus folklore. She was excited for her first semester at college and determined to make the best of it. The dorm was creaky and smelled faintly of mildew, but her room was cozy. On the first night, as she unpacked, she heard faint tapping coming from the walls. Assuming it was just the old pipes or the building settling, she ignored it. Days passed, and Emily started noticing odd things. Her belongings would be slightly moved. Little items disappeared and reappeared in strange places. Once, she found a small pile of dirt on her windowsill. No idea how it got there, since the window never opened. One evening, she stayed up late studying and heard whispering. At first, it was so faint she thought it was her imagination, but it grew louder and words became clear, though the voices seemed to come from the thin walls. "Leave, leave, leave," they repeated in a chilling monotone. Emily's roommate had left early that week, complaining about bad vibes in the dorm. Now alone, Emily felt watched, like eyes were always on her, lurking just beyond sight. One night, the power went out, plunging the entire dorm into darkness. The emergency lights flickered weakly in the hall. Emily pulled out her phone to use the flashlight, but hesitated when a cold breath brushed the back of her neck. She spun around, phone light cutting through the dark, but no one was there. The whispering returned, louder and closer, coming from inside her own walls. Heart pounding, she pressed her ear against the peeling wallpaper. Then suddenly, a hollow voice hissed, "We never left." Shaking, Emily tore off the wallpaper to reveal old scratched messages etched into the plaster beneath. Words like "help me," "trapped," and "don't trust them." She realized the dorm had been built over an old asylum wing. Forgotten stories of patients who died there, their spirits trapped and desperate. Over the next few nights, Emily's sleep was invaded by nightmares of ghostly figures clawing at her from inside the walls. When she awoke, scratch marks appeared on her arms, though she was sure she had done nothing in her sleep. One morning, a janitor found Emily frantically trying to tear down her walls, whispering that the voices told her to dig them out. She was taken to the campus clinic, eyes wide with terror, muttering about the dorm's inhabitants, wanting her to join them. Emily never returned to the dorm. The building was quietly closed for renovations, but students who walk by still swear they hear scratching and whispering late at night, as if whatever is trapped inside those walls is still waiting, still trying to reach out.
Story number 2.
There was a junior named Marcus who transferred into a lesser-known dormitory on campus, a building locals avoided because of its eerie history. It had been constructed decades ago on the site of an old cemetery, and strange things were often reported there. Cold spots that could freeze your breath, flickering lights, and shadows moving against the flow of reality. Marcus thought it was all nonsense until his first night. He was trying to settle in when his room's old rotary phone, which hadn't worked for years, suddenly rang. Hesitant, he picked it up. Silence. Then a faint breathing. He hung up, chalking it up to a prank. But the calls kept coming at midnight every night, always silent, sometimes accompanied by a low, mournful sigh. One night, he stayed awake waiting, and the phone lit up again. This time, a whisper seeped through the receiver. "Find me." Spooked but curious, Marcus started exploring the dorm. Behind a loose panel in the bathroom, he found a small box buried in the wall cavity. Inside were yellowed photographs of students who had once lived there, each one marked with a date and a cryptic symbol. The dates matched disappearances spanning decades, all tied to this dorm. He showed the photos to his roommate, who laughed nervously, but then went missing a week later without explanation. Now alone, Marcus felt the dorm closing in on him. Hallways stretched impossibly long, mirrors reflected scenes that weren't his own, and his own reflection sometimes stared back with hollow eyes. One evening, the lights went out completely, and Marcus was trapped in darkness. A cold, ancient voice whispered his name, urging him to join the others. Terrified, he ran blindly through the halls until he reached the basement, a place he hadn't dared enter. Inside, He found a wall covered in names, including his roommates, scratched in frantic handwriting. The air grew thick and oppressive, and shadows began crawling along the floor. Marcus realized the dorm was a trap, a place where souls were swallowed and forgotten. As the shadows reached for him, he screamed for help, but no one heard him. Now, the only sign he was ever there is a new name scratched faintly on the basement wall, slowly fading under the cold stone.
Story number 3.
There was a student named Mark who transferred to a college known for its historic campus and old dormitories. He was assigned to a dorm building that had been converted from a former fraternity house, complete with creaky wooden floors and dim hallways lined with peeling wallpaper. The dorm felt different from the start, colder, somehow quieter, as if it held its breath. On his first night, Mark heard footsteps pacing outside his door. Thinking it was just another student, he opened the door to find the hallway empty. The footsteps stopped immediately. He shrugged it off as a prank and locked the door again. Over the next week, strange things escalated. Lights flickered randomly in his room. His laptop would shut down mid-use, and sometimes he'd hear faint music, old jazz tunes from the hallway, though the dorm was supposed to be quiet after 10 p.m. One night, Mark woke to the sound of someone knocking from inside his closet. When he pulled the door open, the closet was empty. But on the floor was an old photograph of a group of young men dressed in 1950s clothing, posing on the very same dorm's front steps. One of the men in the picture looked eerily like Mark. Same face, same build. Disturbed, Mark showed the photo to a resident advisor who told him the house used to belong to a fraternity that mysteriously disbanded after a tragic fire decades ago. Several members died inside, and some believed their spirits never left. That night, Mark was jolted awake by a choking sensation, as if invisible hands were gripping his throat. He struggled to breathe, clawing at his neck in terror. When he finally gasped for air, the room was empty again. Determined to leave, Mark packed up his things the next day, but as he did, he found the photograph again. This time it was on his desk, face up, even though he had never left it there. The next morning, Mark was gone. His bed was unmade, his belongings untouched, but there was no sign of him anywhere. The only clue was the photo on his desk, now with a new figure added, a shadowy outline standing behind the group, a twisted grin where Mark's face had been. Students who moved into that dorm after him say they sometimes hear footsteps pacing in the halls at night and catch glimpses of a figure watching from the shadows, forever searching for a way out.